Hey everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back and welcome to this fifth video in a mini-series of sorts, taking a look at the Victrix Pillage warband sets. The first four videos we're looking at, I'm trying to remember the order, the Saxons, the Rus, the Vikings, and the Normans. We did normal reviews of those sets. I think they were all great, but I've been saying all along that I wanted to do a fifth final kit bashing or conversion video. Because while I normally like to do that kind of thing within my reviews, I reasoned that I didn't want any one set to be missing out on bits from another. Maybe one coming down the line in the review series. So I thought, let's just wait till the very end, and we'll do one big kind of kit bash extravaganza. And so here we are. And I'll tell you, I'm really excited for this because while I've done plenty of Victrix conversion work and kit bashing between sets, I've really never been in this position before where I have this many sets to draw from simultaneously. Normally it's like I have bits in my bits box, pick up a new Victrix sets and use those bits on those new bodies. But I've never really been in this position where I can go both directions with the accessories, head, and weapon bits between bodies. So this is a real fantastic opportunity. And I've been saying all along, as long as I've had this review channel, that these schematics that now come with at least all new Victrix sets within the last couple of years, these are really just guidelines as far as I'm concerned. If you stick to this, you'll be fine. You're not going to have any issues whatsoever. But if you're thoughtful, following just a couple of rules that I'll go over in just a moment, you'll have no issues at all. Not only blending within sets, like different arms on different bodies within these sets, but kit bashing between sets. And that opens up a lot of hobby and modeling opportunity for us if we are able to do that. So let's talk about methodology here, because I had a couple of ideas in mind of how to approach this. The most obvious of which was to just do what I normally do in my videos, which is to just kit bash between sets, and as I'm showing off the models, tell you where the bits came from. I thought that might get kind of tedious after a while, especially if it's like a 15-20 minute video, like by the 30th model. It might not be that much fun anymore, and I realized that certainly with that many figures, even I, being as familiar with these sets as I am, might not remember which bit came from where. So I thought maybe the best thing to do would be to color coordinate which sprues are from which set. And I've got a key, let's see how my editing skills are, that I'll put down at the bottom now. So that'll just be at the bottom of the video for the rest of the video as a reference for you to know which bit came from which set based on which color it is. Because I've just gone through and I've done, using some washes and some contrast paint, a coat on each of these sprues. Now I've also isolated what I think are the core, like most important frames from these warband sets. Basically I'm ignoring the command frames and I'm ignoring the cavalry for now. But the command frames for me are more kind of variations on a theme. And by doing it this way, where I have essentially one sprue of the core infantry from each set and then a sprue of the archers, it lets me do an elevator pitch of sorts for the warband set that I hope Victrix makes, which is what I'm going to deem the mercenary warband. And that is one sprue each of their Saxons in the yellow, their Rus in the turquoise, this is the Rus unarmored frame, their Normans in the red, or it's maroon really, but we'll call it red or magenta, but red. The Dark Age Archers, which is this kind of ghostly blue-green color, but I'll call it green for the purpose of the key. And then their Vikings in the tan color. And incidentally, if you had one sprue of each of those in a single warband set, that would be the same number of sprues as all of the other ones, or most of the other sets. It would also be 36 models, which is the same number of models as come in the infantry-based warband sets like the Rus and the Vikings. And I think gives you a really awesome sampler pack of Dark Age figures from across the entirety of the Victrix Dark Age line. So here's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go through in a moment and start kit bashing these. I want to make up a good variety combination of figures, and I want to use all of these, all 36 of these, to make my own, again, mercenary pillage warband. And I'm going to follow a couple of rules here. So I do want at least a third ratio of spears, hand weapon and shield, and Dane axes. And then I also want a good number of ranged options like archers and some slingers. So I'm going to make it as evenly divided as I possibly can, and then a couple of command models in there as well, because there's plenty of heavily armored guys to make some command out of. So I'm going to try to evenly split it as much as I can in terms of weapons. That's rule number one. And rule number two is I don't want any head and arm combos to be the same color as the bodies. So the head and the arms can be the same color. They can match one another, but they cannot match the bodies, because I want to show off best as I can just how interchangeable these sets really are. So those are the rules I'm going to follow, and we'll see what we come up with. My recommendation, if you're doing this for yourself, and I'll reiterate this later in the video too, is that if you want to do this, the one thing you need to pay attention to are, in particular, the arm attachment points, right? Because what you'll find is that a lot of these sets have similar arm attachment points. Some of them, basically, they're just usually like two different types. This is a weird one, right, where you've got one flat and one almost complete arm. But most of these you can see are cut off kind of at the sleeves of whatever either tunic or hauberk they're wearing. So there's that, and then there's also these flat designs where they're flat. And some of them are kind of angled because they're meant to be carrying like two-handed weapon of some kind. That's something else to pay attention to. But generally, that's kind of it. You're just paying attention to whether it has an arm that's cut off at the sleeve or if it is an arm that is cut off at the shoulder. Because you can see that, like, I'm willing to bet that whatever arms go on this guy would go on this guy without much of any issue at all. And, you know, vice versa here. Like this guy here has arms cut off at the shoulder. So the arms that would go on this guy, I think, would be able to go, like, on this guy pretty much without any issue. So that's what I'm going to be paying attention to as I go through here. Same with the heads, of course. If it's got a flat top head, right, you got to use a flat top head on it, but I can draw that from, say, the Norman frame, and then vice versa. Anyway, I'll have some fun with it. So we'll see what kind of miniatures I can come up with, and then I'll show them off at the end. So a quick item here, because a subscriber had specifically asked for this, was a side-by-side comparison of spears. And the reason for that is because Victrix has actually increased the thickness of their spears over the years, beginning with the Victrix Vikings and the Saxons, which you can see that's Vikings, Saxons, Normans, and Rus. And the Vikings are on the thin side. They're much more true scaled, but right around the time of the Normans, which was a little bit before, I think it was like the Greek hoplites, I remember they specifically said they started increasing the thickness of their spears due to feedback that they were thin and prone to snapping. And I've only ever experienced that when I try to like twist a spear off of the sprue, off of, say, the Vikings. You might have it snap on you, which I haven't had happen if I cut it off. But it is something to be aware of, that the Viking spears, you can see here, I'll zoom in as best as I can, but I figure if I handle it, it's going to make it a little harder to see, but that the Victrix Viking spear is definitely thinner than the Rus. And in fact, if I isolate those two, Vikings being the oldest, Rus being the newest, and really put these side by side here, you can see that the difference is, it's subtle, but there, that the Rus spear is a little bit hardier. So, as I said, I like that variety, because even that the Viking spears generally are shorter than what you get in like the Saxon or the Normans. So it really makes for like more of a thrown spear look, especially if you're mixing these within a unit. But just something to be aware of, that the Rus spears being the newest set, the Normans are also on the thicker side, but the Rus are definitely the thickest, and the Vikings are a little bit on the thin side. Before I dive in and start converting these, this is just kind of a housekeeping item that I wanted to show kind of while I have all these miniatures out and in the same state of disassembly, to show you how they all scale up together. You can see once again my assessment with the Victrix range is that they're really close to one another. I think that the Normans are slightly larger. Even the Rus, I think, are a little bit larger than, say, the Vikings. I think that they would kitbash together just fine. But generally over the years, Victrix, as with their weapons like we just talked about, I think I've been deliberately scaling things up just a little bit, just to make them slightly more heroically proportioned, a little more imposing looking on the tabletop. The only exception I've found is with their World War II Germans, which I think they deliberately scaled down to match the Warlord bolt action range, which I think was a clever move. But overall, you can see, I think that from a height standpoint, these are all pretty much the same size. I don't really see much of a difference between them. So I thought I certainly don't want to show off, the entire conversion process here, but I wanted to kind of let you in on what I'm doing so that if you want to do this for yourself, you might have a better eye for what to look for. So what I have here is a Saxon body, you can see from our color coding. And what I want to do, remember, is I want to mix and match from anything but the Saxon sprue for this body. So what I mentioned earlier you want to pay attention to are certainly arm attachment points, then also the head attachment point, what kind of neck goes on there. So the arm attachment points you can see are cut off at the sleeves, and I'm so happy that Victrix does this, especially with their male hauberks, because it means you won't have that kind of glaring seam at the shoulder joint. So what we want to look for are an arm length that is matched up to this. And I know from experience that like the Viking sprue has a lot of those, because you can see there's lots of other bodies that are cut off at just maybe above the elbow. But think of it like a t-shirt sleeve. So I'm looking for an arm like that. And so even just looking at this, for example, like this one has too much of the sleeve sculpted on. This one's probably just about perfect, right? So I'll take that arm off. And you can play around with it too. Like this is where I talk about dry fitting a lot, which is just to hold it up to the figure and see if the proportions look right. And in this case, I think that looks pretty good, right? So I'm going to do the same thing. Maybe this one here, you can see is cut off around the same point, versus like this arm would not work unless I was willing to cut it down a little bit, because again, that is going all the way up to the shoulder, and on this figure we have it just down to the sleeve. So same thing here, you can dry fit, and dry fitting is your friend when we're talking about figures being kit bashed. So there, once again, I'm looking for proportions, make sure everything looks right. So that is going to be a good conversion so far. So for the head attachment point, we're doing the same thing, because they have like 3 or 4 different types of head attachments, and all of the sprues except for I think the Normans have some heads with this flat top design. So once again, I want to avoid my yellow frame here, but let's go over to like the Rus, for example, which have a lot of cool heads. Like this head, you can see like these are all the flat top designs. So these are all going to be totally interchangeable with anything that has that neck attachment point. So once again, you clean that up just a little bit. Dry fitting is our friend. So again, you can just hold it up and see if it looks right. And in this case, you can see the proportions look right and the attachment point is correct. So then all you gotta do is glue them together. I generally glue the heads on last, just because I like to have the heads kind of looking in the direction that the model is facing. But even that's a cool thing about multi-part plastics, is that you can completely change how a figure looks just by tilting the head in different directions. So again, we'll start with the arms here. And as I said, I'm not going to go through and do this for every single figure. I just wanted to show you sort of how I approach the kit bashing of these various sets. So as I said, you could have him looking this way, like in the direction of his shield, or you could have him looking this way, like he just came down in a swinging attack pose. That's one of the things I love so much about multi-part plastics. So let's have him like that. So there you go. So now he just needs a shield, maybe a scabbard, some accessories, etc., and it'll be good to go. So let me go through. I'm going to do this with all of these figures, and then I'll show you how they look in the end. Alright, so let's go on a little journey together here. So I did 8 of them up with what I'll just deem hand, weapon, and shield. Some are with swords, some are with axes, and one of them has a sax knife out. And you can see, again, referencing the key down at the bottom there, which sprues these various bits came from. And this group of 8, I'll say, was probably the easiest to put together, because it required like no cutting work whatsoever. Because I was able to find an arm attachment that matched a sleeve for every single one of the figures that I grabbed. And I was just grabbing bodies at random. You can see it's a good mix of armored, padded armor, unarmored, a couple guys with chainmail in there. So you're going to have no issues looking for hand weapon bits. And then, of course, a good mix of shields in there, too. So then next I made up some Dane axes, and interestingly there are 6 proper Dane axes across the 5 sprues that I'm putting forth as my mercenary frames, 5 of which just come from the Viking sprue. 1 comes from the Rus, and there's actually kind of a 7th that is sort of that, I don't know, hand and a half axe, if I can borrow that term. So this was, I mean, it required less cutting than you would imagine. But that's, I guess, the one other piece of advice I would offer is that in a lot of cases, if you find that some of the arms aren't quite lining up, and this is particularly true of two-handed weapons, like bows were the same way, usually it just requires a little bit of shaving off of either the torso or off of the arm that you're dealing with in order to get it to be square. So that's what I find. Like I had lots of little slivers of plastic on my work desk after I was done with this unit just to get everything to line up so that I was flush. But you could see, again, none of these arms belong to these bodies, and I think it's a convincing enough result, and it really didn't take as much work as you would imagine. So if you watch my reviews that include the Archer frame, you'll know that I've been claiming all along that when they say there are 6 archers in, for example, the Vikings or the Rus sets, there are enough bits in there to make 12 archers and 4 slingers, if you'd like to. And so the best proof that I can provide that that's true is that none of these bodies that you see here with bow arms or slinger arms are from the archer set. And I think some of the poses actually, like this one here, if I back up, with a Viking guy there with the arrows in his right firing hand. Some of the poses I was able to achieve here, I think actually look cooler than the bodies that come in the Archer frame. So that's probably my advice, is that if you get the Vikings or the Rus or even the Saxons and you want a higher number of archers than come on the Archer frame, is to do what I did, which is to just mock up some archers, like maybe make the 6 archers from the Archer frame first, and then like pick out 4 or 5 bodies that you want and make some archers out of them. Because I think, yeah, as I just said, some of the poses here are as convincing, if not more convincing, than some of the proper archer poses. And these were, I mean, you can see here, like this is another good example, the guy toward the middle now there, where I just had to make a cut there, like on that arm in order to get it to fit. That was it. That's the extent of the conversion work that we're talking about here for most of these. So the spearmen I actually made last, but I'm going to show you the command figures that I made last. So I was sort of left with a really interesting assortment of bodies because I had just been sort of grabbing stuff at random for the other units that I've shown you so far. But it proved to be the easiest to convert up. You can see that even in the more extreme cases, like the Normans, I would say, were the hardest to convert. They required more cutting of arms just due to the way some of the figures are laid out. But otherwise, like, despite the fact that these bodies were, again, maybe the more complex bodies of the lot, I found no issues finding a spear option for every single one of them, sometimes multiple spears, and I just had to like pick which one was my favorite. And that's mostly a testament to the fact that every single frame, other than the archers, has numerous spear options to choose from, so it's really easy to find something that's going to fit whatever figure it is that you're messing around with. So yeah, I think that these look really, really cool. And then finally here I made a little command group, because remember, my claim that I'm trying to make here is not only that you can kitbash these Victrix sets far more than you might be led to believe that you can, but also that these 5 sprues in particular would make for a really fantastic warband set, and that you could make a command group from it without any issue at all. Because you can see here, once again, none of these arms belong to any of these bodies, and I made up a little musician guy there, I made up a standard bearer, I made up some kind of like bodyguard with a torch there, and then of course I have a, I don't know, Jarl, mercenary captain, something like that, that I thought looked convincing enough. So they were a lot of fun to put together. Again, there's much character inherent to these figures already that it's easy enough to kind of sell the story of whatever character you're trying to create just by adding on some various bits. So there you have it. I made myself a Pillage warband, and I have lots of models left to make a couple more, which I think I'll do at some point here down the road. And I'll tell you, I had so much fun doing this. It's not that I say that I don't normally have fun working on videos, but this was a real treat. Going through, it kind of took me back to like my earliest days in the hobby of, you know, like on a rainy Sunday afternoon, just mashing a bunch of models together without any real thought for how they're supposed to go together. Kind of air quotes on that. And yeah, I hope that's, if nothing else, what I've demonstrated for anybody that might be hesitant about Victrix models, because I think it's an objective fact that they make beautiful models and they're very reasonably priced. The only like concerns or critiques that I've ever heard anybody raise about Victrix has to do with the fact that at face value it might seem kind of intimidating, right, to have these kinds of like blueprints or schematics that it almost looks like the models have to go together in like one or two different configurations. I'm here to tell you from years of experience, from what I just demonstrated to you, just like throw them out, put them aside for all I care, right? Like I can count on one hand how many times I've consulted those blueprints when putting sets together, and it's only for like really obscure bits, right? That I'm just almost more just trying to figure out where it was intended to go. But you can find so many combinations just with a little bit of ingenuity, and if you just take a little bit of extra time, right? There's so many combinations here. There's so much potential, and I think that these sets are fantastic on their own, but what makes these pillage sets so cool to me, I've mentioned kind of the sampler pack nature of them, that you're being able to draw from multiple kits at one time, is that I think that these sets become exponentially better once you start blending these bits together. So definitely something to check out. Again, if you're at all considering Victrix, at all considering dabbling with Dark Age models, I can highly recommend that you check out, at least like just pick up a pack of one of their pillage sets, because it's going to allow you to do some of what I was able to pull off here. And there you have it. So Victrix, yeah, I guess if you guys are listening too, I hope you'll consider my recommendation that you guys release a mercenary warband. 1 archer, 1 Norman, 1 Russ, 1 Viking, 1 Saxon, 36 models, 5 sprues. And I think that it would be well received by the community. And there you have it. So we're going to move away from pillage here for a second. My Victrix Foot Sergeants should be arriving here in the next day or two, so I'll have a review of those up very shortly. I also got a gift from a subscriber of some miniatures to press into my scale comparison collection. So there's actually going to be a surprise updated scale video coming out soon. I've got a surprise collaboration video. It's going to be released early next week, maybe late this weekend. We'll see what happens. Painting content to come. There's lots on the horizon. Hopefully something for you. But if nothing else, I appreciate you dropping by for this one in the meantime. And until next time, happy gaming.